O Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, who art everywhere present, and fillest all things, treasury of good gifts, and giver of life, come and abide in us, and cleanse us of all impurity, and save our souls, O good one. Lord, mercy, Lord, mercy, Lord, mercy.
Through the prayers of our Holy Fathers, Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy on us. Amen.
Amen. This is recording now, right? Alright, so let's we'll start it slowly, and I just realized we've been stuck on this book 5 for a second day or a third day. Is it the second meeting on the same book? Yeah, I mean it's
second.
As you can tell, it's
Second.
it's really packed with arguments and information and things. Did you have a chance to read it through?
Book 5?
Yeah.
Not the whole thing.
Did you read the Legend of the Grand Inquisitor yet?
No.
Alright. Well, maybe it will make. I hope today's will make your reading easier, and even for those who did read,
I did.
will enlighten some things. So just as a reminder that last time we looked how Dostoevsky showed us that Ivan's position of this detached outside critic is unjustified and untenable. We haven't seen, however, what he offers as a solution to the conflict between the existence of God and the innocent suffering. So, given that the main theme of the book is this apology of Christianity, the answer must be obvious, right? So, it's obvious for us to think that Dostoevsky will propose that, Christianity and specifically Orthodoxy has some way to reconcile these two things. However, even if in his own journals that he kept while writing this book, he did acknowledge that the attack by Ivan's character is strong enough that it's hard for him to come up with something as a counter argument for those things, those issues that Ivan is having with the existence of God and all those little children suffering. But anyway, the main burden of proof, sort of the main argument against Ivan, is going to come in the next book, book 6, which is, I think, called the Russian Monk, and it will be sort of the homilies and the life of the elder Zosima. But before we get there, last thing before we get to the Grand Inquisitor, now that we've seen Ivan's argument, we can also go back to book 4, and where the Zosima had that small sermon saying that we are guilty before all people. So now we'll have more insight to understand what he's trying to do there. And for example, unlike Ivan, who is saying, well, there must be some force which is able to forgive all these atrocities, and then at the same time it's not impossible even for victims, if they are able to forgive, to forgive such things. But in that little sermon, Zosima is not talking about forgiveness, but he says that you should not hate, you should not have you don't have to forgive, but you should try not to have adversarial feelings, so to speak. That it has to be a different approach. You may still not forgive the perpetrator, but you should not have hateful feelings against your enemies. That's one thing. but at the same time, Zosima is asking for forgiveness for all and before all. And lastly, we can understand now why Zosima claims that monks are the most, as he says about monks, they are worse than all those who are in the world, saying that monks, like Ivan, in some sense, are trying to return the ticket, and so to speak, withdraw from the world and say that we have nothing, we don't want to have anything to do with the world, and just hide behind the monastery walls and pretend that they have nothing to do with the outside world. And as we saw with Ivan, that none of us is able to claim that we're spectators. We're all participants in the play or in the movie, however you want to call it. Therefore, this is why Zosima says about monks that they are worse than the people who stayed in the world, because they are trying to return their ticket, like Ivan does. So now we're done with that. We can jump to what is called the legend of the grand. Is he great or grand? Great.
Grand. Mine says
Grand?
grand. I'm not sure.
Then you're right. And among other things, this is probably one of the most misinterpreted pieces in the whole novel. Main thing to remember before we start: this is not what Dostoevsky is saying. This is not what a Christian is saying. This legend is composed by Ivan, giving his thoughts on the matter. But this is Ivan, the guy who does not really believe, who is not religious, not just
He's
religious.
mostly agnostic.
Yes.
And Dostoevsky associates himself mostly with Ivan.
Well, maybe that's why people make this mistake, and Russian writers writing about it, and I think they're all missing the point. So and the easiest way to sleep and make a mistake is try to analyze it like this is like that. These are the Dostoevsky's real thought. So you should keep in mind, Dostoevsky has a character Ivan who has this poem, and then the Grand Inquisitor lastly will attribute some thoughts or statements to the Jesus figure, right? So again, when I will be saying that Jesus in the poem is saying this or saying that, what I really mean is that Dostoevsky is writing the novel with the character Ivan, who is writing his story, in which story there is a character Jesus who is saying this. So at least for the purposes of today's evening, when I will be invoking the name of our Lord, what I really mean is that the character in this particular piece of fiction, not outside of the church context, just to make it clear.
Does this mean this is Ivan's image of Jesus?
Yes,
Right.
we'll get to more details, whose image it is and who this figure represents in the novel. I'll try to sell you my understanding of it, but yes, this is, like you said, this is mostly the image of Jesus in Ivan's head, who is composing this piece of literature. But so this whole story is based on the piece from the Gospel where Jesus is tempted by devil in the wilderness to give some background, this scene, or this story appears in 3 Gospels, which are called Synoptic Gospels: Matthew, Mark, and Luke, who are supposedly based on some similar source, and does not figure at all in the Gospel of John. And then we mentioned many times already that, on the other hand, Dostoevsky's favorite Gospel writer is St. John, and in the legend itself there will be a few, or I would say even many, references to the Book of Revelation and other pieces from the Gospel of John. So to put us in the context, you will be my reader. Can I ask you to read? This is just the excerpt from Matthew. You just read.
Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." Jesus answered, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down. For it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." Jesus answered him, "It is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. "All this I will give to you," he said, "if you will bow down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil left, and angels came and attended him.
Thank you. So, this is the primary source for this big discussion that, is spilled over tens of pages. And to properly understand this, all you need to do is recall the view on the human nature, the view on the human self that Dostoevsky is showing throughout the book, that it's a contradiction between two opposite forces, two opposite parts. And what's going on in the legend is that one figure, who is Grand Inquisitor, is representing the view that, both Grand Inquisitor and Jesus figure, they represent one-sided view to the human nature. So the Grand Inquisitor is arguing that humans are all, this dark part. All there is to being a human is just this dark part, the animal, so to speak, the animal part. And Jesus is representing the opposite view, more like the closest to Ivan. That's like similar view is expressed by Ivan, that the real human being, the essence of being human, is just this light and good part. And this is the human beings are able to be just that, with all these passions and the darker part being cut off. And so together with this, then it's clear that also parallel to that, he has two views on Christianity being represented by these two figures. And both of them, if you know that Dostoevsky is for the human beings to be complex, so both these two views on Christianity are wrong. One is so-called Catholic, because of course where they had the Inquisition, and it's kind of apparent that Grand Inquisitor represents Catholicism, even though Dostoevsky does clarify that it's just the extreme. Basically, if these two views are taken to the extreme, that's where they will lead. He's in no way saying that this is how actually Catholic Church is, but he's sort of showing the end result, the end game, where it will all end at the end.
Alyosha said that
Yeah,
he
well,
said that
and
it's,
he so
it's
he also
not so-
explicitly, but what he said, I will actually quote in this book. It's in 260. Even Alyosha acknowledges. It's page 260. What he says exactly to Ivan, and who will believe you about freedom? Is that any way to understand it? It's a far cry from Orthodox idea. It's Rome, and not even the whole of Rome. That isn't
Yeah.
true. So he's actually saying right there that this is not
It's not
like
exaggerated.
the true representation of the whole of Catholic Church, but this is like the essence of the direction where it's going. So that's obvious because they even name it in the book. And less obvious is which part of the Christian world is represented by Jesus.
Orthodoxy?
No. Because remember, both of them are wrong. In the story, both of them will be wrong. So, and Orthodoxy is the right approach to Christianity. So,
So you're saying what's the other incorrect Christian?
yeah, which movement or which part of Christianity Jesus' figure represents in the legend?
Oh, I don't know about.
Since
Jesus,
Grand
but there's-
Inquisitor is Catholic Church, who is
Protestant?
Orthodox.
There seems to be like a predestination
mm-hmm.
element to it.
Well, Calvin is a famous one for the predestination, but there are actual, he is actually telling us, exactly who it is, because in the beginning, if you read just the start of the Grand Inquisitor, first of all, he says, 1500 years have passed since the first coming of Jesus. So that would be
15th century.
15th century, right? And what happened in the 15th century?
Reformation.
Reformation. Then he
actually
says,
happened in 16th century. It
Or-
started
Oh
in
yeah,
15th
you're
century.
right.
so then on page 248, right on top, he says, just then in the north, in Germany, a horrible new heresy appeared.
Oh, he means
So
Luther.
Yeah,
Martin
so
Luther.
you know,
Martin Luther was in
Luther.
Germany and Calvin was in Geneva, which
Yeah.
was that independent city but was French speaking.
so this coincides with the appearance of Jesus in the legend.
But the first Protestant was Wycliffe. His father was young Goose, who was burned to the stake. That started all the Crusade wars, and people protested in Bohemia, Moravia, and that's why
Okay,
they call
but
Protestant.
for the purposes of the novel,
Yeah.
he's giving us indication that when the Jesus is standing up for the Protestant Church, and the last indication of that is that in the legend, Jesus himself doesn't say a single word, and then the Grand Inquisitor actually tells him that no, you cannot say anything, you cannot add anything. Like he specifically says, you cannot add anything to what you already have said in the Gospels, and that's the Luther's view, sola scriptura, you cannot add anything to,
But
whatever.
it says something about that is pravoslavia, the orthodoxy, that is, I don't remember which part, but that is orthodoxy that is right.
But this is what I'm saying. So he has the Grand Inquisitor representing Catholic Church being wrong, but also we will, go through it today. Jesus' figure in this legend is also wrong. He has opposite approach, but neither of them lead to the salvation, the solution of this dilemma that we had earlier between the existence of God and innocent suffering, and either view has a one-sided approach to what humans are, to the human being, but as we said many times, Dostoevsky has a human soul as a, by nature, as a contradiction of two opposite forces, and the only part of Christianity that has that view of human self, for Dostoevsky at least, is orthodoxy. So that's why you have that table, these antinomies. Either side here will push human existence to either too far right or too far left. Either like make gods out of people or make animals out of people. And only orthodoxy is able to have this middle ground and actually let humans to live a fulfilling human life as they actually are, this constant contradiction between wanting to do good and always doing the bad, so to speak. Okay, is this whatever we have said so far, is that clear? Right? Okay. So we talk about who they are, and now we can move on to these three temptations. Can I erase this now?
Yeah.
So we have these three temptations, and first one is bread. I'll call it bread. The second one is to perform a miracle, and the last one is to assume ultimate power. And all these three temptations, they answer one ultimate question: what is the essence of human soul? What is the essence of being a human being? And it's on page 252. The Grand Inquisitor confirms it by saying, "For in these three questions, all of subsequent human history is, as if brought together into a single whole and foretold. Three images are revealed that will take in all the insoluble historical contradictions of human nature over all the earth." So he is calling them insoluble historical of human nature. Why why are they insoluble and historical? Any thought on that?
How is it solvable? What does that mean?
You cannot solve it. Unsolvable.
Oh, okay.
I guess
I
that
think
would
that's
be
that's
that would be a
solvable.
proper word to use in a modern
I
language.
was thinking like dissolvable. It
No.
doesn't make any sense. Okay.
Well, because prior to Christ's coming, prior to Christianity, this contradiction of human nature had no resolution.
Right.
There was no religion, there was no philosophy, there was no worldview that would be able to take this contradictory part and make peace between them and make a whole human being containing both. Because if you remember our first meeting when we talked about Pascal and his description of especially the Greek, the different ways that Greek philosophy was developing, that's the exactly same thing was happening there that is in the Grand Inquisitor. You either had the schools of philosophy who said, like Plato, that human is what it means to be human in essence is the rational and reasonable part. All these desires and animal drives are not essential to being human, and he had this ideal world of ideas. But then on the other hand, you had people like Epicureans and others who said, forget about all of that, you just enjoy your sensual experience, and this is all it is to the world, is whatever pleasure you are able to get through your senses. And so what he is saying by that before Christianity there wasn't really a solution to this conflict, to this contradiction. That's why it's historical, before coming of Christ in history it wasn't available. But at the same time, Christ comes, Christianity comes, offers us a way of living where we can solve this contradiction, where we can make peace between our two opposite parts. But then it gets infected, I guess, so to speak, by these pagan influences and like power struggles and interpretations and things like that. And instead of offering and providing this solution, different approaches to Christianity sort of go away from the source, so to speak, and then they make the full circle and go back to the Greeks. And now we have the Grand Inquisitor saying that human beings, all it is, they're just animals who need to be herded. And then we have Protestants saying that having such an idealistic view of human nature that it breaks away with the reality. Everything can be resolved just by reason alone, which we all know is not true, at least for anyone who actually tried. And of course, just to reiterate, then there is a middle way, the Orthodox way, which is supposedly to be the proper one. And to highlight these views, I'm saying, what Grand Inquisitor is saying, what the Jesus is saying. It's on page 253. The sort of right in the middle there, when Grand Inquisitor is talking about people, he calls them weak, eternally depraved, and eternally ignoble human race. But on the other hand, he says that Jesus came to set people free. And by the way, he is quoting, I think it's, it's actually from John chapter 8, the Gospel of John. Like on Pascha, we say Christ is risen, in truth he is risen, and then some people reply, and the truth will set us free. So this is the line from the Gospel of John where he says that I am the truth, and the truth will set you free.
I have a quick question. Was it all this discussion about Inquisitor and Jesus, and Inquisitor being Catholic and Jesus being Lutheran Protestant, was it clear to readers at that time?
Not too many. Very few actually understood it. A lot of readers at that time would take Jesus' figure literally to represent the ideal Christianity. They would interpret it in a way where it's like the Jesus figure in the Grand Inquisitor, that's what Dostoevsky thinks that true Christianity should be like.
Oh, that was the understanding
Yes.
of most of the readers.
This is why I'm saying most of the readers then and now still are making a mistake.
That's how I understand it.
It's not, well, one thing, like the main argument, just to tell you why it's not the case, he has another book which is called The Idiot. I don't know if any of you read, but there the whole book is dedicated to study, there is that character who is like the Jesus figure here, like Ivan is trying to be, who is all perfect. He never had a sin in his life, he never had any shortcomings. He's just this, no wonder he's called an idiot. He's just all this perfect being who comes out of nowhere and is trying to help people around him. And what ends up happening is that he is hurting instead of helping, because he has no understanding of the weaker part of being human. He has no understanding of the darker side, because he has only this good and noble part.
Saintly part.
Yes, so that's why that's another argument towards the view that the Jesus figure in the Grand Inquisitor is definitely not this ideal view of what Christianity should be. I hope that answered.
I'm just a little bit confused.
Mm-hmm.
Just because the Jesus figure is so silent throughout the whole thing,
Mm-hmm.
so the Protestant view is coming from when he's going among the crowds and performing miracles, or because
No,
the
but-
Sola Scriptura thing comes from the Grand Inquisitor. He's the one saying.
Yes, but then throughout the whole story, he doesn't say a single word.
Oh, so he's like acquiescing to it.
So he's performing as you would expect, like a Protestant view would not add anything on top of what's already said in the Gospels.
Even though he's adding.
So what
his
you can
actions.
do is, like a Grand Inquisitor, is go to the Gospel and read your own meaning there, but not add anything on top, right? No extra words from Jesus, so to speak. Nothing apart from what's already been said.
Is it like an internal thing, or like a rejection of any kind of symbolic representation?
That's a rejection of interpretation.
Sure. Like in a lot of I would say most Protestants reject any kind of symbolic representation that's
Well,
extrapolated too far because it's
And not only that, I mean, you can read there that, Grand Inquisitor attributes to Jesus, so this is what Jesus supposed to think or say, that no miracles are no longer allowed, and you can see it in the table. No more miracles. You don't need a church. You have to be, all you need is you and God. It's just that relationship that matters. There is no need for community and things like that. So a lot of these views are extreme version of what your mainstream Protestant would agree with.
Does Protestant practicing communion?
Well, they're not practicing communion. I've knew some that they just buy grape juice and crackers, and they symbolically
It's not real.
go
It's
through
just-
the ritual, but for them it's
Yeah.
just it's
Yeah.
just to commemorate
Yeah.
whatever happened 2,000 years ago. They have no sacraments, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And so I had said about setting people free. Let me see, there's another one. Yeah, and so basically the grief that Grand Inquisitor has with Jesus in the legend is that if there are any people who would be able to conform to this high standard, there will be very few, and the majority of humanity would never be able to be on par with that high standards. And he says to him, of course you can point with pride to these children of freedom, of free love, of free and magnificent sacrifice in your name, but remember that there were only several thousand of them, and they were God's. What of the rest? So this is the view that, you know, you're making people into gods if you say that, or like we said, I think there was a quote from Madison on the government that, you know, if people were angels, they would need no government. So what the Jesus view in the Grand Inquisitor is making angels out of human beings, and we know that we are no way close to that.
They're kind of circular, because the Protestant individualism
Mhm.
is, if it's expressed to its full extent, then it just becomes the original animalistic human nature, right? Because if everybody is just interpreting everything on their own, then there is no
Protestant. You
theology,
don't
right?
interpret. You don't interpret.
Mhm.
You just take gospel. You just literally take whatever is written. You
Yeah,
don't
but
even-
you
Not
internalize it,
necessarily,
and then you
literally.
and then you don't need anybody intermediary between you and God. You
Yeah.
just talk to God.
Yeah,
directly.
and you justify it. You justify everything that you do through that lens. But if you take it to an extreme, you get to a point where
Well, I
any
mean, this is
action can be justified as like godly in a sense.
well, not I'm sure not any action, but basically what's happening here is that yes, Jesus in this piece is taking that view to the extreme, and so therefore reading this we can see the consequences. I don't think they go as far as you just said, but they basically what happens is that ideal is on the one hand not attainable for the majority of us, but on the other hand is this pure rationality, and Ivan in the beginning of the book kind of mentions it, that what happens then is that instead of God being something, you know, beyond us, we with our rational, you know, thinking start to attribute whatever characteristics that we can, so it becomes not a divine idea but idea from, you know, from our limited head, and therefore everything else is, I guess, even God becomes humanized, so to speak. So
Right.
we then it's, I think, let me see, I think I'll get to there a little bit later. So if just to go through this three temptations, first one where bread is offered to be turned, or stones are supposed to be turned into bread. On the one hand we have Jesus, who has this ascetic minimalism, I guess close to how the monks live, even in the Orthodox monasteries. On the other hand, Grand Inquisitor is saying, you know, you have to fulfill our basic needs before you can ask us of any morality or any moral behavior. We need to be fed, and we need to have a shelter, and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, you know, Jesus would say freedom above all. You know, you don't want to sell your freedom and minimize your autonomy just, you know, for the basic needs.
Это как Маслов. У Маслова так это.
Yeah, the Maslow
Yeah.
pyramid. Yeah, so that's that's close, yeah, and related, I'm sure. But you know, Grand Inquisitor has this. No, people will always trade their freedom for bread, and that's, in essence, you know, our modern society where, you know, I one morning come to school into the teacher's lounge, and this old lady teacher comes in and says, looks at us and says, if not for my credit card bills, I would never be here, you know, a single day more. And goes on teaching to her class. So basically what we have is people not doing some fulfilling jobs or being creative. I mean, probably minority is, but for the most part is something that people would rather not be doing, and they're enslaved to this bread, so they spend most of their lives and most of their times just trying to survive, so to speak.
Basically being corporate slaves.
Well, I mean, corporate slave, it's not a bad position where you're like, compared to like some slave labor, actually, in the mine. I'm sure like, a lot of people in Africa would trade their position to being a corporate slave.
They will trade.
So yeah, and in terms of how the societies are organized, we have, if it's Jesus' view, we have this unjust capitalism, I guess. That's what we would call it, because it's on page 253. The Grand Inquisitor claims they will finally understand that freedom and earthly bread in plenty for everyone are inconceivable together. For never, never will they be able to share among themselves. So he is saying if people are led to free enterprise, there will always be somebody who is more successful, who will try to hoard more resources to himself and to herself, and just by goodwill, people will not, if they are completely free, they will always be, the ones who are on top and the ones who are less fortunate, and people will not be able to agree to a more just society where everybody is more equal. And the opposite of that is, of course, the totalitarian state. The ones, Soviet Union is probably the best example, where everybody was supposed to be equal in poverty. So
some were more equal than others.
Yes.
The court will say all animals created equal, but some more equal than others.
Mm-hmm. We had the issue of miracles come up a few times already throughout the book, and I mentioned, and not everybody agreed with me, that Dostoevsky had to deal with the science on the one hand and the modern age, where we know so much more about the world around us, the physics and chemistry and all of that, and he had to reconcile it with Christianity somehow. So in the legend we have Jesus figure saying just plain no to miracles. He doesn't want to have faith. And this issue comes out throughout the book many times, whether or not it's good to base your faith on miracles. And Alexei supposedly is not that guy, that, and you will see that he will first have faith and then he will be able to perform miracles later in the book. Sort of a teaser. So Jesus says no. In our age we have no need for miracles. Otherwise, again, you lose your freedom. You do not come to faith and believe in God by your free choice, but you are, so to speak, forced into it by some supernatural thing happening. And interesting enough that even the Grand Inquisitor says there are really no miracles. Maybe when 1500 years ago they were possible, but now we know that they're not there. So what he offers is there's some sort of magic ritual, make-believe miracles that we will stage, and because people are so base, dark and stupid, they will keep on believing in our rituals and the miracles that we will stage for them, so to speak. And this is where we just talked before that in the first case, in the case of this extreme Protestant view, God is basically forced within the limits of human understanding. You're supposed to understand something that created all of this, something that is beyond, this 3-dimension and time by our limited mind. Therefore, we reduce God to whatever is compatible to how we are able to think. And on the other hand, people are reduced to, let's say, stupidity, because they have this irrational faith based on something like a miracle, something that they cannot explain, that something that they think is beyond, supernatural.
It's an interesting point of view, because when more people start believing that God is a multi-dimensional being.
Well, let's not get into that, because next thing will be discussion of dark matter.
But still, we have a lot of miracles.
I'm not disputing again. As I said that time before, I'm here to sort of present and defend Dostoevsky's view, right? It's like with Jesus figuring the Grand Inquisitor. Don't attribute everything I say to my personal belief or understanding.
But are you saying that Dostoevsky did not believe in miracles at all?
As I just hinted, he did. He basically had this special kind of miracles which did not break any laws of physics and chemistry on the one hand, so they are compatible with science.
With science.
But on the other hand, they were still miracles, meaning that, well, I don't want to jump too far ahead. It's coming in 2 books or 3 books from here, but they are still miracles, and no less powerful than, some miraculous, water coming out of icon. Let's say that.
I would say most biblical historians, there is such a thing as a biblical history, which I studied for many, many years, not theology, but biblical history. They believe if Jesus did not perform all the miracles, there would be no Christianity today. So they actually believe that all the miracles they describe actually happened, because otherwise people will not follow him.
On the one hand, and on the other, he also said, and it will be shown in the book too, that the times we live in right now, human nature hasn't changed, of course, but the times when the Jesus came and what was possible then is not the same as today.
But it is.
So basically, if he comes again, basically we haven't seen any resurrection of the dead like Lazarus, for example. Nobody else other than Jesus was able to perform things like that.
That's the only thing.
Well,
So
that's not true, because I know of missionaries to Africa in the 18th century that had people rise from the dead as miracles. And I've read about it. So it happens. It could be happening tonight in China, and we just don't know about it. So miracles happen. Our Eucharist is a miracle.
of course.
Time.
I'm not talking
We
about
can't
that, but
explain
I'm talking about biblical miracles as they were described in the Gospels, things
Like
like
turning water
that.
into wine.
Yeah, turning water to wine. It actually will. It will be the first
There's a reason
miracle
why that doesn't happen.
in the Bible and in the novel.
Yeah.
And
At the
so.
end of 19th century, there was
But what
scare.
he is I'll rephrase it. His task, his mission is to give it a description that is different from atoms and molecules changing their structure, or the molecules of celluloid being turned into H2O sort of thing. He wants to have a different description where you avoid all this talk about physics and chemistry and still are able to describe the internal experience inside your self, myself, or whoever is witnessing or is part of that miracle. And he will say that this is where inside of you, that's the place where the actual miracle
Yeah.
is taking place. Is that more clear?
Yes.
I hope. And so one example, and we will come back to it. We already talked about confession, and Father John was there, and he actually even carried it on to his sermon.
That's right.
But again, this confession, they discuss it in the legend, whether the confession is some supernatural miracle. Jesus would say, or Jesus figure there would say, no, you don't need a confession. All it is, it's your direct relationship to God, between you and God, so you don't need a priest or any sacrament. You can just go and inside your room, inside your head, silently have your confession, and that's it. You don't need any more. Whereas the Grand Inquisitor will say, no, there must be this ritual. We, whoever these new priests, we have to carry this ritual, and people by going through this ritual will sort of get rid of this burden, and their conscience will become clear without any necessity to something being changed inside of those people who come for confession. It's just by this magic that they come to us and we say, yes, you are absolved now.
Yeah, and then we are going to know all about them, right?
Yes, so you see, there's again these two extreme views. Both of them corrupt Christianity, the essence of Christianity, and turn it either to a ritual or to an idea inside your head, and reducing God to your own, imagination, basically. Neither of them will work, and then you can go back and remember what we talked about confession and what it takes for the real confession to take place. So then later there will be this story. Woody Allen actually made a couple of movies based on this story about the guy who killed his lover and made it so that everybody thought it was somebody else who killed her, and he lived a long life, married again, had children. Nobody ever knew that, I think he has like 2 or 3 actually, not just one, dedicated to the same subject. And this guy was going through the sort of confession that the Jesus in the Grand Inquisitor would advocate, that it was always him inside his head laying in bed and saying, God forgive me, and this is all it takes. And obviously, if by the end of his life,
But still he needed
yes,
Alyosha
he
to
had
he
had another human. He had to have another human being to confess to actually lighten his burden. But we'll get to it in time when we get to it. But Woody Allen, his mission in life was to prove Dostoevsky wrong. That's why he was making those movies where the guy would, in a similar situation, just live happily ever after and never care about the murder he committed. That was my impression. But then his actual life, the actual life of Woody Allen, and how it, developed, and things that happened, and especially in his later years, sort of, I hope for him, for his sake, that they proved him wrong and Dostoevsky is right. And it will always come back to you, no matter how long it will take. Well, anyway, that was a diversion. So yes, what else? Maybe a little bit more. It's on page 255, 256. It's a rather long piece. Can I ask you to read it better?
is that how human nature was created, to reject the miracle, and in those terrible moments of life, the moments of the most terrible, essential, and tormenting questions of the soul, to remain only with the free decision of the heart? Oh, you knew that your deed would be preserved in books, would reach the depths of the ages and the utmost limits of the earth, and you hoped that, following you, man, too, would remain with God, having no need of miracles. But you did not know that as soon as man rejects miracles, he will at once reject God as well. For man seeks not so much God as miracles. And since man cannot bear to be left without miracles, he will go and create new miracles for himself, his own miracles this time, and will bow down to the miracles of quacks or women's magic, though he be rebellious, heretical, and godless 100 times over. You did not come down from the cross when they shouted to you, mocking and reviling you. Come down from the cross and we will believe that it is you. You did not come down because, again, you did not want to enslave man by a miracle, and thirsted for faith that is free, not miraculous. You thirsted for love that is free, and not for the servile raptures of a slave before a power that has left him permanently terrified.
Yeah, I think it's a good summary of what, of these two views on the nature of miraculous, and how this Catholic or Protestant approach to it. So to finish off for today, the last miracle is the power when Jesus rejects the offer to become the supreme ruler of the world, as this is supreme commander in the Star Wars. And what we have on the one hand, it's individualism and personal autonomy, very Western-esque idea, versus the universal power structure. And with the Catholic Church, it's been for 1,000 years. And again, on the first day, we talked about how 5 years before the novel was published, the Pope of Rome ceased to be the political leader in Europe, and Italy became independent and united into one state. So that's why it figures out in the legend too. But again, on the one hand, if everybody is just this one single individual with no social connection, no community around him, we are all become these isolated and separated individuals, which is often the case now, especially more often in a modern society. But on the other hand, we don't want to be submitting to a group for this sort of security and external validation of our morals, of our values, and things like that. I'm pretty much done with what I wanted to say for today.
Who is this guy?
Победоносцев.
That's what I saw.
Yeah, he's I just brought a picture. That guy was like a prototype for the Grand Inquisitor figure, at least his external appearance. We will move on finally to the book 6 next time, the Russian monk, where in book 5 we saw all these wrong views. What happens if you take human nature as being this simple thing, and to what bad results it will lead in either case, whether you think it's all good or all bad. So in the next book he'll try to present the orthodox way of reconciling both halves of the human nature and how to live a happy life in that context.
I have an unrelated question, but about the
Sure, I'll try to answer.
I mean, and it might be more of a question for Father, but I found the Grand Inquisitor's argument very compelling about, like, the standards are so high, it's only possible that a very few elect will ever, like, attain salvation, and, like, I think that seems
Well,
to
he's
be
not-
the case in reality. It's like, I don't know what the Orthodox response is to that.
He's not saying that very few will attain salvation. He's saying that very few are able to live up to that standard. And maybe I said it, I think I mentioned it in the beginning. So this is why we have this sandwich between the previous book, where, you know, if there is any saint in the book, it's Elder Zosima, right? If anybody is close to salvation, is Elder Zosima. And he is saying about himself that, you know, he is guilty before all people and for all people, and he is definitely not in that category, at least in his own mind, of those few who were able to behave as, you know, God figure, you know, to be so pure and so clear and so forth. So definitely in Dostoevsky's view, there are no real people like that.
Oh, okay.
And nobody,
Those are like the
it's a wrong idea try to follow. Like Ivan is basically trying to be like that.
Katya's whole thing is
Yeah, because she is the female version of Ivan's character, right? And this is why they have to marry. So Dostoevsky at least definitely would argue that this is the wrong idea. This is a misconception. People are not like that, and this is my whole speech about the idiot. That, you know, people are, you know, there is no use for people like that to humanity. And he would say that if Jesus was just God and not God-man, then he would not be able to offer us salvation. You know, he would not be able to help us if it was just pure God with no, you know, human essence and to the full extent. You know, he was also human.
No, but he was without sins.
Of course, but I'm just saying, you know, he wasn't like just part human. Whatever, everything that we take to be human was present in him. So I don't know if that answers, and yeah, this is why his argument is compelling in the sense that if you take the view of humanity that you have to be this pure and clear and clean, then yes, only few of us, if any, would ever be to conform to that standard. This is why Jesus' view in the legend is also wrong. You know, the Grand Inquisitor is wrong, but the Jesus figure in the legend is also wrong because he is wrong, but on the opposite side. That's the whole idea of the legend, to show two extremes. Neither of them is good. That's why they're called antinomies. You know, neither of them is correct. It must be a third view that resolves, you know, both extremes. That's the gist of it. I think, yeah, so then we hope to see you all next Wednesday, where it will be more light reading and more pleasant.
Actually, Bedenos was extremely smart man. Him and Stolypin, they were both extremely smart.
Well, they shouldn't be running a church, that's for sure. There shouldn't be a minister of religion in the government.